yes, the industry perspective on vaccine, the way forward. So I'm, I've been, like all of you, trained by the public sector, an MD, PhD. So now I'm the private sector. I'm in charge of global public health, R&D portfolio, public-private partnerships, and of course external funding that link to that. And I've been involved in many of these vaccine development, Japanese encephalitis, rabies life cycle, West Nile, and lately dengue, which I spent 20 years of my private sector life. So I start with the excellent slide of John Arnay and those CEPI colleagues that are define the success factor. What are we looking for? I think it's obvious that industry, vaccine industry, diagnosis industry, and drug industry, we are looking for PPP. There's, in the current area, it's not a question whether yes or no we should be involved in PPP. It's about what type of PPP and what are the framework of this PPP. So response time, clearly, in the sense of urgency. Complementarity is very key. Well, you know, the keywords, very trendy ecosystem. We live in a current ecosystem that is evolving, and you need to find complementarity between public and private actors. I think the old silos, you know, the public sector, good public health, and the for-profit, money-driven private sector is behind us. Now the lines are blurring. I think we share a lot of in commons. We still have our specificity, but nevertheless, there should be a need for complementarity, agility, efficiency, and last but not least, sustainability. So for us, in the private sector, you know, scientists, industry. So I listed here some key parameters. It has to be in the preparedness partnered, as I say, advanced R&D and IO, industrial operations, because that's not vaccine that save lives, it's vaccination. You need to reach the patient and having capacity and supply. Incentivize, it's key. So there is lack of market incentive for most of the targets that John Arnay showed you, that Marie-Paul showed you. Still a bit uncertain whether we should add a couple to this initial WHO list, and we keep firm. I think it's also up to Europe to see whether we'll work along these lines for the European specificity. Philanthropic, public, hybrid. I think there is a lot of models we were discussing here, and they definitely need for incentives. Flexible, of course, they should be ideally about RFP or PDP. Again, the flexibility should extend to phases, pathogens, technology, and that CEPI has listened to these messages. We are scientists by training, by our day-to-day operation, quality-driven, so we are very concrete, deliverables-oriented. It's all about science. I think science is, we all agree what the level of water in the glass. Then you can see the empty or the full glass, but I think there is an agreement that we have the same science, whatever, in the private and the public sector. It's milestone-based work plan, inclusive. I think if you look at Pfizer, Merck, GSK, J&G, Sanofi, we all have unique capabilities, technology. We do think that the private sector and all together we should leverage this diversity and having to some much more interdependent consortium. And the last one is something that is really dear to my heart. We are living in a world where we are interdependent. It's based on trust, what I call sharing of interest. So that so far, we heard yesterday, today, that we need to look for independence, avoid bias, avoid conflict of interest. Here, we are in an area that we need to look at shared value. I think it also has been taken by CEPI in its key principle. So now trying to sort out and to put some simple messaging for us. There are two key phases in terms of biopreparedness, what I call the preparedness and then the response. That first, it's essential because it's not exactly the same stakeholders and the same, you know, what and how. So phases, they're early and late. If you look at CEPI, currently it's covered preparedness only, not response. I think they have a plan to look into response, but so far it's about, let's say, preclinical to phase 1 to A, maybe phase 2B. It has to be clarified in the future. And it's clear that for us, the key private sector players are R&D driven, end-to-end company, the one I just mentioned before, which called multinational companies. What I call P5 in fact push public-private partnership principles. First one is to define the what. And for me, for us, I think it's a public sector to define the ID threats that are relevant to EU. So whether Europe, as it has been told before, will embark into the WHO list, the CEPI list, European ECDC list, I think it's something that needs to be decided. It's very clear that we need early detection and thresholds that signal us the need for preparedness or response phase. And Lynn showed us a very, I think, one is for me very useful consortium, which is GLOPID-R, which is precisely be committed to develop this early detection threshold and ID pathogens. Then for Europe, there should be a epidemiological, political, I'm not afraid of the world, decision tree, because there might be some unique agreements, for example, between African countries, between Middle East countries, between with French overseas territories, because obviously as French, we are concerned by everything in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Guyana, very close to Latin America. For us, the how needs to include the private sector, you know, the push incentive. The idea is to have several RFP, again, the flexibility of various R&D industry partners, again, to optimize probability of success, because each of us enjoy different technology, different platforms. The key risk I listed here from experience is to avoid duplication, but I put implication. And there is a need for interface alignment within the EU for private public actors, EMEA, for example, regulatory, WHO, normative role, I think Marie-Paul told us, and CEPI, which will, I believe, will play a key role in terms of work plan, RFP, and funding in the next future. Second phase, much more important, it's a response phase. So you see it's cover what? It cover what you call the valley of death, which is a huge investment needed to phase 3, to scale up manufacturing, either due to limited stockpiling. If you are lucky, you can control with a few 100,000 of vaccine doses an epidemics, or if you are in late phase, then you need the real manufacturing, industrial facility, and vaccination campaigns. And then it's the same. Who should be driver? As Paul told us, I think it's about quality. And I think we do think that MNC are uniquely equipped because we have the GMP quality driven. We are under FDA. Just to remind you that when we say, well, it costs €1 billion or dollars to bring a vaccine from research to licensing, about half of this cost about quality. This is all the quality system, the regulatory requirement, the training, the GLP, the GMP, what we call the GXP, which is not really that we spend money for that, it's really that it's needed, expected by the regulators. So if you look now at these push and pull measures, which, as I say, are very costly in response phase, we do think that in the wet, the private sector needs to be associated to that given the level of investments. And we can think about creative partnerships, even multiple private partners with the public partner, whatever being Europe or being CEPI or being CEPI, Europe, etc. So we do think that there is a need to look at these technology platforms and industrial, with an industrial twist. Some of the contract could be there for this response phase. It's another, of course, it's another dimension because, for example, it's advanced market commitment. It could be worth of $1 billion sometimes if you look at pneumo conjugate, which is the precedent for us. You have to specify geographies, timeline, because it takes time, volume, years, and or basic assumption, as in Europe, a European company, it will be a free pricing, unless a very new mechanism that I don't know if you're familiar that has been put for AMR, which is the linkage, whether at the end of the development period, the company will receive a huge prize, order $1 billion, and then it could have the drug or the vaccine here, but the drugs licensed at a very affordable price. I think that's we are not yet there in the vaccine area. Again, the same. There are many factors, so we need to avoid what I call implications or duplications. We need to, and again, there will be also on top of the previous, the procurement agency, Ministry of Health, extremely, because of course the sensitivity, remember all these declarations for Ebola and Zika and etc. So European Ministry of Health and the high-level procurement agency, we might be involved in case there is funding like Gavi, UNICEF and PAHO. So just to give you a few examples, is industry doing the job, delivering? The answer is yes. Let me take a few examples here. So the one I've been directly associated to the SARS vaccine. You remember in 2003, it was all the rage. I think the world was going to collapse if there was not a SARS vaccine. So what we did in about roughly 16 months, we go from the receptions of the strains to having a viable vaccine here, be ready to test. However, we did all this at the expense of our own internal program. At the time, we are not developing a rotavirus vaccine, a pneumoconjugate vaccine. All our resources and expertise were on SARS vaccine because it was a world crisis. And you guess why it happened? After the end, we had the lots, and the epidemic was over. And even the NIH told us, Well, thank you. We pay that. I think it's at the time we received $8 million for all this. I can tell you the real costs were far higher than that. And NIH said, we pay for that. We okay. We won't use your lot because the epidemic is over. So the risk is higher than the benefits for us. So that was a lesson learned for us. But anyhow, we can do that. We can mobilize. Look at the recent example. So I take it's another lung, but it's not linked to my family. It's just published in Nature. And you see that in few months, and usually take years to start a clinical trial, they have been able to start here from the grant awarded to the start of the clinical trial. I think it's a line also we had Skenny told us, same story with Merck or GSK. So monoclonal antibodies. So there are some interesting monoclonal antibodies should be used. Maybe there might be a place for that monoclonal antibodies therapy to control in epidemics at the beginning. So it's a slide that was provided to me by Martin Frieder, who was working with Paul Kenny. So you see, there was all the rage. A lot of small and medium companies, small biotech, have the miracle drugs that can cure. And when you look at these data, wow, 100% survival in monkey before 5 days challenge with Ebola. Maybe there is a cure there. However, you see, we need to be prudent because when we escalated that to clinical trial, in fact, it was a bit disappointing. So I think we should be extremely careful about the hopes we can rise, etc., in monoclonal antibodies. So, and this also illustrates the difficulty of the animal rule when you want to translate from one animal model, which is not fully understood and designed, to a human clinical trial. So chikungunya, so it's personal. Again, chikungunya, we have some monoclonal antibodies we developed at Sanofi. It might be used against. Just here, we have started to have fundings by US Department of Defense. And these chikungunya antibodies could be used, we don't know, from sporadic epidemics because it might be at a limited scale and maybe that all will be needed versus a large vaccine with no market. So what industry has done so far in the global public health and beside the public? So there are three known development initiatives: vaccine development capacity, the Global Fund for Vaccine Development, the CEPI, with the CEO in the room, the BARDA Platform Initiative. We want to elicit, plants in these countries, and they had a huge project in Brazil, for example, with Butantan, trying to set up facility that could be leveraged in case of epidemics. But just as an example, with our familiar, we have the industry two global health initiative. So GSK, formerly there was a Novartis facility in Italy, but recently I think they set up, they committed to use, and Marie-Paul and John Harney mentioned about this. It's called BPO, Biopreparedness Organization. So you see it's a picture given by GSK, and the R&D laboratories, the pilot plant, GMP testing, etc. And we had the same, but it's different. It's not exactly the same model, but it's also a global health. It's called Global Health Vaccine Center of Innovations. It's a partnerships with IDRI, the biotech. We are leveraging it's a non-for-profit biotech, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you see roughly it's the same, same size and roughly the same number of scientists that will be committed to work on this target, provided this is incentivized, funded. I try now to be thinking out of the box. So the title of my presentation was The Way Forward. So let's think a bit out of the box. What could we dream or think of as new mechanisms for Europe to help us achieve our objective for biopreparedness and response? So number one, fast-track, centralized, and streamlined regulatory review. And maybe a proposal would be, because in Europe every country compete with each other, maybe we should have some specialized country by pathogens, and so that we don't go for this call or who is interested, who want to do that. Some country could develop unique expertise, expert networks internationally, and guide us to expedite these reviews. In terms of creativity in the regulatory, I think the classical question is always a case by case, but conditional license, which initially started in the veterinary vaccine, might be a thing where, based on phase 2B, I'm not so sure about animal rule, which have been seldom applied, that might have a conditional license that after the same time you accumulate data vaccinating patients. A fourth one, which is very important for the US, it's a priority review voucher, which is kind of a price for a list of disease for which you have license in that example in Europe to consider. Pharmacovigilance is also important because ideally we'll have vaccine with smallest database at the one we have a regular vaccine. So I'm thinking also of a tool like e-tool or other tools for vaccination safety follow-up that will also reinforce the confidence of the public that we rush to use a vaccine that is not yet the same database than current vaccine. And of course, it's all about funding, so it's clear that if you want to think to be serious about that, I can't think about a budget less than 100 million euros in terms of preparedness and even more for response. And again, as part of the CEPI or coordinated by CEPI, some requests for proposal. And last but not least, you know that one of the most flexible, user-friendly, and adaptable mechanism is the BARDA, and all of us are leveraging BARDA, but sometimes there might be a European BARDA we could also leverage. And also IFIM, Jean-Arnaud, you mentioned IFIM, I think there is some reflection around that. And by the way, as you know, IFIM or IFIM is funded mainly by European countries, so might be a way, a lever to introduce that IFIM financing facility into European priority. That's, well, I think this listed if you think now what we have, our IMI2, H2020 or EDCTP, which are the classical European PPP. Number one is it's about epidemic detection, surveillance, diagnostic, preclinical models, surrogate, biomarker, clinical trial networks, efficacy modeling. Something that is a bit overlooked, which is a famous R0. I don't know if you're familiar with R0, but it's basic reproduction number. It's absolutely key, because based on that, it's give the number of patients that could be infected by an index case. And based on that, you can really predict, or if you have better understanding, whether your epidemics will be sustainable and will stop. Just to give you an example, for measles, R0 is 12. For polio, it's 6. For Ebola, it's 2. So I think we are, if you look at R0, it indicates you whether there is a need maybe to go to the response phase or not. But we are lacking current understanding of all these epidemiological diagnosis, transmission factor, etc. Regulatory licensure, post-licensure effectiveness, pharmacovigilance, and last but not least, patient engagement is something we should seriously, because as you know, well, I'm living in a country, France, when 40% of the population have a doubt that vaccine is really worth to be received. And that's something that is a heavy trend, because you know, it's called the vaccine paradox. People forgot about the disease and just focus on the vaccine side effects. It's something we need to think in the future. Having said that, that's my last slide. Just, and something that's dear to my heart, the trust-based sharing of interest for the PPP. Thank you.